Hello and welcome to the Native Connections Training and Technical Assistance webinar, the 3 Ps, Building Blocks of Procedure, Protocol, and Policy. We'll start in just a moment, but first let's review some housekeeping items. Please add your full name to the participant list on the left by using the drop-down menu in the upper right-hand corner of the attendee box. That will open a small menu where you can choose Edit My Info to enter your first and last name and your program name. All phone lines will be muted, but we encourage you to use the chat box for questions or comments. At the end of the webinar, we'll have a question and answer session so the presenters can respond to these. My name is BC Echohawk, and this is the SAMHSA Native Connections Grantee webinar. Along with the Native Connections team and our SAMHSA Contracting Officer representatives, Maureen Madison and Jan Dunbar Cooper, we thank you all for joining us today. As I mentioned earlier, today's topic is the 3 Ps, Building Blocks of Procedure, Protocol, and Policy. Our webinar lead today is our Native Connections colleague, Deborah Rattler, one of the many knowledgeable grantee technical assistants on our team. Joining her is Sarah Pearson, our Native Connections curriculum developer and a subject matter expert on tribal action plans. Before we begin, we'd like to open in a good way, and doing that for us today is our colleague and grantee technical assistant, Hunter Ginya. Hunter?
Miigwech, BC. Ani, everyone. My name is Hunter Ginya. I'm one of the GTAs, and I have the honor and privilege of working with 10 Native Connection grantees. And at this time, I'd like to open this up in a good way with a good medicine song. So this is a good time to think about your community and your family and those things that you are prayerful for and grateful for. Deborah?
Oh, thank you. Sorry. Thank you, BC and Hunter. Hey, it's great to be speaking with all of you today. The focus of our webinar today is procedures, protocols, and policies, which are something that we all live with every day. You know, they dictate just about everything we do, no matter what we do, especially in our work areas. For example, when you're hired for a job position, you're provided with a list of rules or procedures and policies that give you direction on what to do. If you want to take leave, there's usually a procedure or policy that will explain when you can take leave and how to request it. So I believe that everybody here today does have some experience with procedures, protocols, and policies. Now this is part one of a 4-part procedure, protocol, and policy webinar series. We have a new toolkit that will be provided to all of you, the grantees,
by chapters, as we've aligned each of the following webinars with the toolkit. Now, the toolkit was developed to provide you with useful knowledge on developing and or revising policies and procedures. Now, the information we will present in this 4-part webinar series is transferable to your strategic action plans. The toolkit provides examples, templates, guidance for customizing, and suggestions for testing each within your community or organization. So each of the following 4 webinars will expand on specific policies and procedures. Now today, we will get started with Chapter 1 of the toolkit. Now, one of the first steps in the Native Connections approach is to consider community strengths and level of awareness before you start anything. Your community readiness analysis scores and community systems analysis are important parts when creating and implementing your procedures, protocols, and policies, or the 3 Ps. Now, Chapter 1 will provide definitions and examples. And as we review the types that you may want to develop or revise, a logic model sample is included. Now, this will provide a visual diagram of how different developmental parts will work together. We're also going to examine levels of collaboration and what to consider when doing a stakeholder analysis. But before we begin, let's go to Sarah, who has some questions for you.
Thanks, Deborah. Hello, friends. This is Sarah Pearson with Native Connections, and I'd like to play an agree or disagree game with you. You guys ready? What I'd like you to do before we get started is to look at the top bar of the Adobe Connect meeting, and if you see a little person waving at you, there's a down arrow. If you can click on that arrow and choose the green checkbox for me so I can see that you can do that. Crystal's got it, Dana's got it, Heather's got it, Akasha's got it. Great. Everybody, let's. Joe Lewis, did you get it? Kathy Wilson, Eugene, Dave Braveheart, Chanel. Okay, I think a lot of people can get that. Can anybody not call down the green checkbox or can't find it? Let us know in the chat box. Kathy's got it. Great. All right, so most of you can find that. Now go back under that same drop-down menu and deselect the green box, the green checkbox, and go ahead and select the red X for disagree. Corbin's got it, Amanda, Akasha, Heather, Izzy, Joe's got it. Okay, Christy. You need help, Christy? How about Crystal? Eugene? Eugene's back on the green X. Okay, good job. I think we're about ready. Okay, so basically with these questions, we'd like to get a baseline reading on your knowledge of the 3 Ps. So I'm going to read each one of these statements listed below, and I'm going to ask you to use your drop-down menu near your name to choose agree for yes or the red X, disagree for no. This is going to move quickly, so stay with me. Are you ready? Okay. First statement. Policies must be captured in written form. Do you agree or disagree? Policies must be captured in written form. Got a lot of agreement. Okay, all right. No, policies do not have to be in written form. For example, you can have policies that are shared verbally, or a visual flow chart may be used to describe a policy. Policies are the rules of the game, and they give us direction. They can be broad or specific and tell us what to do. You could have a policy in your own household. Policies tell us what to do, who should do it, why, and sometimes when. For example, if you in your own household, you may have a policy where everyone takes their shoes off before they enter the house or once they get in the house. And many organizations have written and unwritten policies. All right, next statement. Procedures are always written separately from policy. Procedures are always written separately from policy. Do you agree or disagree? It's a trick statement. Oh, we have a little diversity here. Okay. Dana and Eugene say yes. Well, not necessarily. Often you'll see procedures or guiding directions on procedures found within a policy document. Procedures give us details in the form of operational process or steps. They may even provide steps for specific people, tell us when or how to do something, or when not to do something. For example, a youth program may have a procedure that supports their policy of follow-up on a youth who has exhibited emotional distress, perhaps even if the youth has been referred to a service or treatment. Okay, next statement. Once a policy is written, it should not easily be changed. Once a policy is written, it should not easily be changed. Do you agree or disagree? The people are playing it safe. They're waiting for everybody else. Good. Okay, good, good. Once a policy is written, it should not easily be changed. No. Like your strategic action plan, your SAP, your policies should be reviewed and then changed if necessary. A yearly review is more than adequate, or if there's been an unexpected community crisis, a rash of suicides, review and an adjustment of the policies guiding suicide prevention, intervention, and postvention is a pretty good idea. Okay, next statement. Policies should be written for and by professional staff. Policies should be written for and by professional staff. Do you agree? Okay, all right. Dolly, what do you think? Dana? Dave? Chrissy? Crystal? Okay, no. Policies should be written for and by professional staff, not exactly. To galvanize full community support behind a positive mental and behavioral change for youth, for example, families, including grandparents, should be invited to get involved with those policy developments. It's also helpful when working across services and systems to stay away from jargon so everyone can understand what's happening in the policies. It's really a good idea just to keep your policies simple and accessible to all. All right, next statement. Protocols and procedures are the same thing, right? Do you agree or disagree? Okay. Got Dave on there. That's great. Well, some may feel that they are, but to be clear, a protocol defines the set of procedures or steps to be followed to accomplish a task. For example, an ICU unit, that means intensive care unit, in a hospital will have a protocol for receiving visitors so they can reduce the risk of infection for recovering patients. And staff may follow that protocol by initiating a process or steps to ensure visitors put on, for example, a protective gown and gloves and refrain from bringing flowers or other outside objects while visiting. Another example is that a school will sometimes have a protocol for referring students to support or assessment that may involve a number of steps or procedure. Okay, last statement. You ready? A policy and a procedure are the same thing, right? A policy and procedure are the same thing. This one's an easy one. Yeah, okay. No, again, a policy is considered a broad-reaching, cross-functioning, high-level operation known across an agency or organization. A procedure is a more detailed, localized set of steps. Let's turn back to Deborah as she gives us a little bit more information about procedure, protocol, and policy. Deborah?
Oh, okay, thank you. Let me adjust the slide here real quick. Thank you, Sarah. Now, there are subtle differences between procedure, protocol, and policy. You know, it's pretty easy to use these three words interchangeably because they sound so similar, and they all start with the letter P. But there are differences between them. You know, a procedure is a step-by-step instructions that outline the who, steps to take, and documents to use. Protocols are written rules and formal agreements between two or more parties for actions to be taken and when those will be done. Policies are laws adopted by a group, governing body, a resolution that guides protocols and procedures to achieve outcomes. So we're going to look a little bit deeper at each one of these. Now in our first example, let's take a look at an advisory board procedure. As you can see, this is a step-by-step instruction that outlines who will do what, the steps they will take, and the documents to use. So we know that on the first Monday of every month, the director will notify the committee members of the date, time, and place of that advisory board meeting. The step 2, again, the who, this would be the secretary. She's going to take minutes and then send them out to all the members. And then step 3, the advisory board members approve the minutes. The director presents the minutes to the tribal council at the council meeting. So again, you can see that this is a step-by-step procedure. Now in our protocol example, here's another way to look at it, a step-by-step process. Again, this outlines who's going to do what, the steps they'll take, and the documents to use. So you can see beginning on the left side, the youth is being released from juvenile detention. The detention officer notifies the Native Connections director. The director contacts the family and offers assistance. And then with approval of the family, the director will contact the school counselor. So you can see in this example, we have 4 different parties here to this agreement. Now I have 2 different policy examples for you. Now in this one here, it's pretty straightforward. All tribal programs will collaborate on offering prevention, intervention, and post-pension services. And you can see that this is a tribal resolution and that it provides guidance to all the tribal programs. It's short and to the point. It maintains compliance, and it's positive, and it encourages success among all the parties. Now, I have a different policy example. This one is more detailed. It's from the California Education Code. And as you read through this, you can see that this one really has a lot of different parties to this one. We're looking at the superintendent, who's going to develop strategies. And you can see he's really specific here with the suicide prevention, intervention, and postvention. They're talking about professional development, and all the school personnel. So you can see from this example that this one here really does include all of the parts that we've just seen in the procedure, protocol, and policy. So these guidelines, they do drive the protocols and procedures, and they do have agreed upon outcomes. So I'm going to take a minute to pause here for questions on the slides that we've presented so far. Okay. Well, let's see. If anybody has any questions, you can type them down in the chat box, and we will address those as we move through the remaining slides. Okay, now I'm going to turn this back over to Sarah. Thank you.
Thanks, Deborah. Okay, well, I know that your Native Connections Funding Opportunity Announcement, the FOA, provides language for you regarding the developing of procedures and policies, and they've reviewed some types of procedures and policies that grantees could develop and revise. These might include your standards of care for suicidal youth, processes for helping youth transition into care from one agency to another. That's really helpful. The role of traditional healing practices in supporting suicide prevention and substance misuse, really helpful. and the role of Western clinical mental health practices in supporting suicide prevention among young people and their grantees. Also, grantees are required to develop or revise existing protocols that you have to ensure that youth who are at high risk for suicide, including those who attempt suicide and use substances, receive follow-up services to ease their transition into treatment, and develop or revise protocols for responding to suicide attempts, and clusters, and promote community healing and reduce the possibility of contagion, such as suicides following and connected to an initial suicide. These post-prevention protocols should reflect tribal traditions and culture. So while these requirements sound pretty straightforward in theory, would someone like to speak to maybe the unspoken challenges you may have had trying to execute some of these goals? Maybe it sounds great in theory, but when you try to actually implement these, you may have run into other agencies where there's a lack of trust among the agencies that you're working with, or relationships haven't been built to allow you to have easy access to their information, to their existing protocols and procedures and policies, or maybe you've had a little bit of difficulty gaining access to this information. Do we have anyone who would like to share a story or a question about that? Tori, did you have anything, or Maureen, or Dave Braveheart? Okay, no problem. It's just something to think of, because these things sound pretty good in practice, I mean in theory, but when you get to practice, they're a little bit challenging sometimes. So which one is the right one for your community? How do you determine if you'll be developing something new, a new policy, procedure, or protocol, or revising what's already in place? Your CSA Tab 2, the Community System Analysis Tab 2, identifies partners and programs that you've already identified as stakeholders. So that's a good place to start. So review your successful grant application. You may have already seen some examples of partners that have been identified in that application. Again, review your CSA Tab 2 to see a list of systems and programs you've already identified in that database, that Excel database. Identify your existing tribe, village, corporation programs, resolutions, laws, and board decisions that you may have that already exist. And ask yourself, does your program have current procedures, protocols that can be revised or updated? And if you have any verbal procedures or protocols or policies, consider writing them down. Types of policies and procedures. How do you begin determining the specific policies and procedures to either develop or revise? Crisis response and post-prevention could be part or found as part of a school plan, law enforcement, mental and or behavioral health plan. So you may want to ask yourself, how will you be collaborating with your stakeholders? Do you need to look at some example MOUs, Memorandum of Understanding, or MOAs, Memorandum of Agreement, that can help define the roles and responsibilities of your partnership? Let's pause here for a question. We might have one from Mr. Dave Braveheart. Dave is suggesting that Tori might have something that she wants to share. Tori, did you have anything for us? Okay, we can always come back to Tori. I'm going to move forward and keep an eye out on Tori's question. Let's talk about logic models. A logic model is a visual map or blueprint that shows relationships among resources, activities, and outcomes that you hope to achieve. A logic model is a visual representation of your expected inputs, like staff and resources and data, or your outputs like activities, community events, protocols, and policies, and outcomes like reduced suicide attempts or completion, more youth showing up to a prevention activity, and more. You can think of a logic model as a roadmap that you can follow. It shows the route traveled or steps taken to reach a destination. Logic models can be used in program planning, implementation, evaluation, or communication. The policy toolkit includes a template for a logic model within the chapters and a sample of a logic model. Grantees can use a logic model to help them determine which procedures, protocols, and policies would be helpful for them to meet the goals of their grant. I see that there might be something. Nope. Tori she's in listen mode. Okay. So here's an example of revision and development of a worksheet logic model. In the Policies Toolkit, we have provided a blank logic model for you. Here's an example of the logic model worksheet on revising or developing a policy. Let's take a quick tour through this logic model. The situation is that based on your CRM scores and the FOA, the choice dimension score is F, so that resources are the focus. And the score is 2, so you guys need some help there. Native Connection staff don't know what protocols exist, but they want to develop protocols for helping youth transition into care and to increase follow-up after referral. That's a good situation to be in. We can work with that. So the inputs are, you have the Native Connection staff, you have the information data in your CSA, you have youth serving agencies, staff, and practitioners waiting and willing to help. You have existing data and existing procedures and protocols to work with. Your outputs would be that you'll be contacting agencies identified in your CSA, good. You will determine if they have existing policies, that's good. If so, request a copy of their policy to look at. If not, request a meeting to discuss collaborating on that policy, a new policy formation, and meet to discuss policy revision and development. Then you'll revise and develop policies such as youth transition into care. So you're building a relationship as you're developing those policies, and you have to build that relationship because not always do people want to share their information. So we have on the right-hand side of this document, we have the short and medium and long-term outcomes that you can see. On the short term, you'll be learning what processes and protocols exist in the community. You'll strengthen relationships with youth-serving agencies. You'll hold discussions, hopefully on a regular basis, to learn more about best practices for serving suicidal youth. At the midterm, you'll develop and revise coordinated processes and protocols for helping youth transition into care. And in the long term, you'll decrease suicide incidents. Here's another worksheet. This gives you another example to look at. And I think I'm going to turn this back over to Deborah so she can give us a sense of the levels of collaboration that exist. Deborah? Deborah, are you on mute?
Sorry, I was on mute. Okay. Now, collaboration is key to your success. Now, we've developed a logic model sample to detail each level of networking, cooperation, coordination, and full collaboration. Now, one of the things about, Native Connections is that we really do want you to work on, increasing your levels of collaboration with your stakeholders, with your community partners. And so on this sample here, we've just listed a brief description of just what each one of these are and what are the key features at each one. And so, when we're networking, you're sharing information and you're talking to one another. And you usually see a lot of this at your community, maybe health fairs that you do where you're talking to your participants. And again, this is a lot of informal conversation, communication, but it also helps you kind of identify who really wants to be involved in, your programs. As you are moving through your program, you're really starting to identify your partners that will support you and the partners that you will support. And many times there are no formal agreements in place, but you pretty much know what you're going to do. You've got some defined roles, and they're still pretty informal. And you have some really good relationships developed that really, help you move your program along and help move their program along also. And as you really start identifying more of your partners, you're really going to start defining your roles. There's going to be more regular communication among your partners, and you're really going to start looking at making decisions in a shared way so that, they're benefiting both, whatever programs they're from in your Native Connections program. So you're going to be also sharing some of your resources back and forth. When you have a full collaboration in place, this is where you and your partners, your stakeholders, you're all working towards developing that capacity in your community to achieve a vision, which in our case is stopping youth suicide. There's going to be more formalized roles. You're going to be sharing more resources, and this is where there's going to be a lot more frequent communication, especially when you're sharing ideas and making decisions. The next slide, Mark. Okay. Now, an important part of collaboration is really understanding who your stakeholders are. And so when you're identifying who these people are, and you really want to start identifying who are the key people that you want to get involved. These are going to be the people who have a vested interest in youth-focused procedures and protocols, and especially in stopping youth suicide. And again, as Sarah said earlier, your Community Systems Analysis, or CSA, is your first step in conducting a stakeholder analysis. Go back and review tab 2. Look at the 8 systems that you've identified in there. You should have identified key people with phone numbers, email addresses. Maybe there's people that you've identified since you've done that tab, and you want to add more people to that. So review that tab 2, and really start making notes of who are identified stakeholders that you can include in this process. With your advisory board, review your list with them. Maybe they have additional people that they want to add. And with programs that come and go in our communities, maybe there's somebody that's moved on to a different position or a different program, and you need to remove them from your list and then add new people to that list. So you're going to be gathering information, about agencies, about programs, people, their role. You're going to define what do you need them to help you with. Which policies do they have, or which policies can you share? Which policies or procedures and protocols will you need to revise or develop? You want to hear what their concerns are, what are their needs, and include that in your plan for all of your stakeholders. So we're going to look at an example of this.
Hey, Deborah, before we move on, hi, this is BC. I just wanted to see if we could address Michelle's comment here for a second, which is, can we discuss a little bit more about the risk levels?
Okay.
And I'll leave that to you and Sarah.
That might be a good place to bring Tori in to give some examples.
Okay.
She's experienced.
Wait now. Okay. Okay. But when you're looking at your different levels of risk, and again, we're going, part of this is going back to your community readiness assessment scores. One of the things that you did there is you identified in your dimensions, where is your community with there? When you're looking at okay, when you're looking at the different levels of risk with determining which levels that you're going to be moving forward with, again, you're going to go back to, you can look at your levels of collaboration and each of the roles that the different stakeholders will be moving forward with. Okay. Sarah, could you add a little bit more on this one? To this?
Well, from my perspective, and I'd like to pull Lori and Tori into this as well to give some real-life examples, but if you're working with law enforcement, is it more comfortable to work with the networking, a level of networking or cooperation or coordination? And if you look down here, coordination is a low to moderate risk of involvement. Full collaboration is high risk, so law enforcement may not feel comfortable with you enough to open up their policy and procedures books. But maybe if you switch down to maybe just starting with networking, there's no risk involved to them. So you might have an easier buy-in with them, getting them started on an activity with you. And gently move them up as you develop your relationship as the years move on, to cooperation, which has little to no risk, to coordination, which is a little bit more risk, moderate risk. And then hopefully down the road you may have full collaboration, which is, again, high risk but also high trust. So a lot of returns on that. Does that answer your question? Schools have pretty tight FERPA rules on sharing information. So schools may also be in that same level of trust. Then you may want to start to just do networking with them first, move on up to cooperation, then coordination, and then full collaboration. Okay, thanks, Michelle. Tori, did we get Tori back? I think she said she wanted to unmute her phone. She had something to say.
Can you guys hear me?
We can, Tori. Please go ahead.
Oh, hi everyone. My name's Tori Whipple. So I am now a GTA, yay! But I was a project director serving under the Great Plains Tribal Chairman's Health Board for the Crow Creek Sioux Tribe. So I just recently transitioned into this role, and we were developing a policy, procedure, and protocol for the community, and running into many different challenges in that process. So I'm just going to kind of share a little bit of the things that we were coming into. So Crow Creek Sioux Tribe, for people on the call who probably don't know where that is in South Dakota. One of the 9 tribes in South Dakota. There's approximately probably 1,500 tribal members living within the reservation boundaries. There's only 3 communities within Crow Creek, with Fort Thompson being the biggest community. There's a lot of different challenges within the community. You know, a lot of the school district is about 15 miles away from Fort Thompson. It's a BIE school. They do have a suicide task force within the community, which is who we were working with to develop this, the policy and the protocol. So the law enforcement, if there is an ideation or a death by suicide, they do call the suicide task force. They have a crisis team within the task force. So there's a small group who within the task force will go with the police department if there is a death by suicide, and the crisis team will respond to the family so that the police department can respond to the death, and the crisis team will help with the family so that they can do their you know, their investigation. But there is a lot of challenges within this, even that, because the crisis team is primarily Catholic focused. One of the individuals on the crisis team is from the church, and that raises kind of these issues within the community because the traditional people in the community don't like that. So that even raises issues there. So there's just a lot of different barriers to policy within even the crisis team and developing these protocols. And then another new issue that just came up within the last month was there's a new chief of police that just got appointed. So within the last 2 months, I should say, a new thing came up now. So the new chief of police, who's a younger gentleman, has no longer been calling on the crisis team. I'm not sure why that is. That has just came to our attention because, hey, nobody's been calling us. Geez, the suicide ideations, and there hasn't. And we knew of an ideation that we knew of, and nobody been called. So I wonder why. We found out that there's a new chief of police, and he didn't activate the crisis team. Well, so when I left, they were trying to figure out why. Well, we're not sure if it's because, he's not trusting in the crisis team, or if it's just, so as of now, they're trying to figure out why. So the reason I'm bringing all these different barriers up is because the understanding that this does take time. There's a lot of different situations that can throw a loophole until, you develop this awesome thing and you really, it's going on the right track, and then boom, there's a new tribal council that comes into play that may not have a belief in what you're doing. Or one of the things I was telling Sarah whenever we were doing one of my onboarding sessions was that we were doing so good within Native Connections, and in August we were making headway within the schools to develop our peer-to-peer program that it's just amazing, very much needed in Crow Creek schools. We had the superintendent was bought in, the principal was bought in, and it was going to be such a good thing for the schools. And then boom, new tribal election. While within this community, the tribal council serves as the school board because it's such a small community. While with the new tribal council, then oh boom, it's all a whole new school board. And with this new election, it's the school board and tribal council is just a different dynamic. And in this community, just not really supportive of the peer-to-peer program, and I'm not sure why. So it just kind of threw a loophole into everything that we have been doing, all this forward momentum. We just kind of took, all these 10 steps forward. We got kicked back some steps, so it also kind of kicked back our protocols that we were implementing or trying to move forward within the school. That was part of the protocol within the suicide task force. So and I'm sorry to drone on and on about Crow Creek here, but I just wanted to kind of share that because I think with this, we were going over the requirements for year one. It says on there, develop policies and protocols for, I can't remember the exact word, in year one, and it kind of makes you want to chuckle that, this is a requirement for year one. And it makes it sound so easy to do when, it's a lot harder than it sounds. So if you're experiencing that, just take heed that it's harder than it sounds. And if you're struggling with that, just, put your nose to the ground and keep being progressive and doing what you can, because, you have the lives of these children in your hands. And I think that any forward movement you make is really going to help save lives. So I think that what this toolkit I wish that I had when we were in year one, and I think this is amazing because it kind of gives you like steps that you can take. And I'm really glad that SAMHSA Native Connections is developing this, because I think this is so awesome that they're giving you kind of like a guide, because I think this is great. So I don't know if that's even what you guys wanted, Sarah and Deborah. I hope that was kind of helpful. I don't even know if that's what you wanted.
No, thank you. That was absolutely perfect. And, Michelle reminds us that SAMHSA is only asking that grantees get the protocol policy process going in year one. So they expect you just need to get it underway and moving. And if you look at the chart, at least start with partners, law enforcement, schools, and others. Start with networking and try to move up to cooperation, then coordination, and full collaboration. And if you're hitting crickets or silence or no responses, move yourself back down to networking, where it's a little bit easier for these community partners to start to build trust with you, because you never know. This is tricky work. Just as Tori highlighted, there may be unspoken concerns that other people in other agencies don't particularly feel comfortable with you sharing or feel comfortable with themselves sharing with you. So you just have to take a head nod, take a break, and move your way back down this chart and then move back on up. Tori, thank you so much. Let's turn it back to Deb.
Can we hold just one more second, Deborah? Sorry, this is BC again. We had a question from Corbin Storms that I think would be good to answer before we move forward. If either Deborah or Sarah would like to speak about the definition of a peer-to-peer program and how they work. Corbin asks, what is a peer-to-peer program?
Well, your peer-to-peer programs are the programs that that you're going to be getting involved. You want them to get involved with your program. And I think with youth serving agencies, that's one of the things that we, with the community systems analysis, that's one of the reasons why in that community systems analysis, we really work with you on identifying who these programs are, because as you progress through the Native Connections grant, you are going to establish different levels of collaboration with different programs. And so, again, your sharing between programs, I think, is a really big part of all of our Native Connections programs. And I think that's one of the reasons why we really kind of wanted to detail out more of these levels of collaboration, so that as you work with your peer programs, the programs in your community, you really can kind of identify, what levels of collaboration that you're at with each one, because most likely with each of your programs, you're going to be collaborating or communicating a little bit differently with all of them. And again, you're all moving forward to, the same goal, which is reducing youth suicide. Okay. And then I see what Tori, she put in the chat box. For the Crow Creek tribe, it was a youth peer-to-peer program that you were trying to implement within the schools. And again, peer-to-peer in the schools is usually, student to student, as their peers. So thank you, Tori, for that. Let's see, Mark, can you move us forward a few slides to the stakeholder analysis? The next slide, please. Okay. Now this is, the previous slide, I talked a little bit about the stakeholder analysis and how important that is. And so in the toolkit, we also have an example for you in there too about just how to really look at analyzing a specific stakeholder. And you can see in this example that we're looking at the school. And this could be, any of the schools that you work with. So that's who, you've identified as your stakeholder. And so what is their role with at-risk youth? Maybe they're the first ones to identify at-risk youth. Their counselor has a referral process in place. And again, that would be one of the procedures that you would want to, talk to the school about. And so what do you need to do as a Native Connections program? You're looking at developing a crisis response protocol. And again, when you're filling these out, these templates, be specific on what it is that you're trying to do or what that you need, what it is that you need. And again, you want to find out who has these existing protocols. Does the school have a crisis response plan? Maybe it's outdated. Maybe it needs to be updated. Maybe you don't know who's supposed to be notified. Maybe their plan, when they update it, it needs more specifics in there about who's going to be notified in what steps or what part of the process will different programs or people be, part of. And again, also your needs, your concerns, really think about who it is at the school that you're going to approach first. And again, we go back to that community systems analysis, who you have in there, who you need to include in there. Maybe you want to approach the principal or one of the counselors or a safety team if they have one. And then you want to look at what their needs are. They may need the manpower to communicate with families, with the clinics. They may need help making a cooperative agreement, with different agencies that want to be involved with this. So,
and Deborah, there's always that family of parents that are always involved with everything, so you never know. You might find a parent to help out.
Yes, very good point to make, because families are very invested in this because their students are they're very invested in their schools. Their students are their kids. So what do you need to learn more additionally? So make a list of what it is, additional information that you're going to need. You need to see their existing plan. You need to talk to them and find out what their ideas are about updating it. What are their skill level? What are their knowledge agreements? And we just put cooperative agreements here, but you could also add additional information here that you might identify as you work through this logic model. And then when you look over at the plan, be concrete in what you're putting there. The director will call the principal within the next 2 weeks and set up a meeting. The advisory board chair will be in charge of the venue. There's supplies that you might need, such as flip charts, snacks, whatever. So put some, when you're putting in your plans in, think back to how you developed your strategic action plan. When you detailed your objectives and your activities, you put a sequence of events in there. Think about that part for your plan. Put in a sequence of events that will help you meet the stakeholder analysis for this specific crisis and intervention protocol. So let's move on to the next slide, Mark. So, a big part of really working through your policies, procedures, and protocols is really deciding who to collaborate. And I want to come back to this again because I think this is such a big part of really moving forward with what you're going to be doing. We looked at the 4 levels of collaboration on the previous slide: networking, partners sharing information, cooperation, supporting activities but no formal agreement, coordination, you're engaged in mutual projects, you're modifying your own activities to benefit the whole, and full collaboration, a formal agreement in place. And so when you're looking at it from this perspective, like you see on the slide, you're going to start deciding, who should be involved here. Who are the agencies that work with youth? What documents will you be needing? Which policies are out there or which are not there that you need to develop? What makes most sense to do? How you're going to collaborate. And again, this is where filling out one of the logic models will really help you find your answers to some of these questions. What documents are you going to need? We've referred several times to the community readiness assessment that you've all done. You all have your dimensional scores. You're looking at your community readiness assessment. So we want to make sure that you're including that information when you're deciding who it is that you're going to be collaborating with. And deciding when you're ready to collaborate. That's an important question to answer, a really important question to take some time with your advisory board to think about when you're ready to start on this process and how you're going to start on that. Who's going to be the first agency or first program that you're going to contact to set up a meeting with? Many of you may already be past this. You could be in the process of already doing this, or you could have them done, your policies and procedures finished so that you're implementing those. So again, these are things to think about, as you're moving through the whole process. You can refer back to this just as a checkpoint for yourself to make sure that you're moving forward with these.
Deborah, I just wanted to also offer, it's a really good idea when you're at the networking stage with your potential partners like law enforcement and other clinics and schools and maybe other youth programs, that you do a little bit of homework and find out what initiatives they have going, what language they speak, what kind of verbiage they use, and what their concerns are. Because if you approach them with their concerns in mind, it will help get them on your side a little bit more quickly, because it really does show, as you can imagine, that they see that you're thinking about their perspective.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Okay, next slide, Mark. So we've presented a lot of information on this webinar today. I also wanted to remind you that we have the toolkit, Chapter 1, this PowerPoint, and then the logic model template available for download. But would like to know if there's any questions on today's content. Raise your hand, type your questions in the chat box. And if you think of any questions after the webinar, you always have your GTA. You can send them an email, ask a question.
Any parting words, parting advice or tips for us?
Sharon did ask if they'd be able to view this later, and yes, you will on the Native Connections website. It will take a little bit to get up there, but once you do, you'll be able to watch this again. And keep in mind there are some files over to the right-hand side that you can download, including this PowerPoint. Just click on the file that you'd like, and you'll be able to, a download file button will pop up for you to use.
Okay, well, let's move on to the next slide, Mark. Okay, so, we really want you to consider where you're at in the development process. Are you just getting started? Are you in the middle of working on all of your procedures, protocols, and policies? Maybe you're already identifying who your organizations are, your stakeholders are. Whatever you need help with, remember you have your GTA to help you with this. And again, it's really important to work with all your stakeholders to identify any issues or possible barriers. And collaboration does take time, and it does take some work, but this is the first step in developing your protocols and policies. And as Sarah said earlier, this is, in the first years where you start this. There is no expectation that anybody can sit down and do this in a day. Again, this is a process, and it will take you some time to do these.
Well, maybe you could, Deborah. You could do it in a day.
I don't think so. But I think if you follow the steps that are outlined in Chapter 1 in this toolkit, this is going to help you achieve, the goals of this grant, why you're doing this work. And I always want to put in a plug in there for all of the GTAs. They are there available to work with you each step of the way. And if you do decide to use these logic models, they can help you work with you step by step to fill those out. And they're a really good sounding board to really move with you through each one of those. So I think it's back to BC at this time. And the next slide.
Great, thank you, Deborah. So I just wanted to take a moment to talk about our upcoming webinars. Thank you so much for joining us today. We appreciate you being here. SAP Implementation Part 2, Crisis Response and Postvention, will be on April 16th. Part 3, Promoting Coordination Across Youth-Serving Agencies, on May 14th. And Part 4, High-Risk Youth and Transitions into and Out of Treatment. That will be, it looks like June 11th. Looks like we had a little mistype there. So again, look forward to invitations to those so you can register. Additionally, I want to remind you that National Prevention Week is coming up May 13th through 17th. It will be dedicated to increasing public awareness of mental health and/or substance use disorders. As part of this observance, the Native Connections TA team is hosting a digital storytelling festival, and we look forward to your submissions. A proposal form briefly outlining your digital story was due on March 7th, so we're looking forward to final products on April 13th. I apologize, I didn't realize that date had passed. There were informational webinars held on the 28th, and the recording is on the website, and a second webinar will be held on Tuesday, April 2nd at 3 p.m. Eastern Time. You can touch bases with your GTA for more information or visit the National Prevention Week Digital Storytelling Community site. So again, we appreciate you joining us. We will be sending out a survey to you after this is over, and we hope you'll respond and share your thoughts about this and give us feedback as to what you might look for in future webinars. So without further ado, thank you for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you soon.